Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We're here at Chandler with Wade, and this is well, you've probably seen him in other videos with us. This is Mirek from Abbey Road. So we thought, why don't we come all the way out to, where are we, Shell Rock?
Shell Rock, Iowa.
Shell Rock, Iowa. The bustling city of Shell Rock, Iowa.
Yes.
No, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful little town. And we came here to talk about the collaboration that these guys have had now for how many years?
A while, right?
It's going on 20.
Yeah.
It's
wow.
like 18 something.
That goes quick.
Yeah. So weird.
And that collaboration, of course, is Abbey Road and Chandler. So we want to know a little bit about the journey. I suppose let's jump to you super quick and give us where it all started. Because you were saying off camera a second ago that the first pieces you ever got was some TG limiters about...
Yeah, I was in my early 20s trying to get studio going, recording, being a musician, and not really knowing my path yet. There's a pair of limiters in the back there that I bought that were mangled. They weren't in, the faceplates were gone, all sorts of stuff. But I bought them for about $1,700. I talked my parents into buying them for me, So, and when I heard them, I was literally blown away. It did change my life. I'm not trying to overstate it, but it was one of those moments in your life where you go, wow.
So, where was this? Were you living here or were you in LA?
I lived in LA. Like, I graduated early from high school, went out there and like, I'm gonna do stuff, you know?
Gonna change the world.
Yeah, I'm gonna play music, and you know, hadn't quite gone full studio at that point. It was a bit of a transition.
I mean, there's a million different directions we can go here. Because obviously, like, how does a pair of EMI limiters find its way to Los Angeles and then to your hands?
Yeah, well, when I got there, I initially thought I was going to do music, but I had a 4-track literally from junior high, again, thanks to my parents. So I'd been recording since I was 12. And so it was always a big part. And once I got to LA, I was more like, you know what? I'm not really outgoing. I don't want to be on stage and have people stare at me. I like the studio thing. I like maybe writing songs even better. And I just went whole hog that way. I started taking things apart. I had taken things apart as a kid too, and been really interested in gadgets, but I really once I graduated, went off the deep end in that regard. So when I was maybe 22 or something, I already had I think I had a 16-track tape machine at the time, and I had a couple good mics and was trying to get into some good channels of things. And this is one of the things I stumbled on through a gear broker.
It's funny where some of this old gear has turned up over the years.
That's what I'm wondering,
Something like EMI used to make this stuff in Hayes in their factories over in West London for use in EMI studios throughout the world. So even though a lot of the early testing and field work and designs were done between the Hayes factory and Abbey Road studios, eventually that gear would go out to EMI studios around the world, and they had studios in, throughout Africa, throughout Americas, over down in Australia, etc. I mean, all over the world, India. And this gear has kind of popped up over the years, as it were, and that's kind of how it's still very rare, but I mean, the red stuff is super rare. The TG stuff is still rare, but you still see more of the TG stuff pop up.
Things leaked out, and that's probably how I ended up with the pair. Really dumb luck, because it changed my entire life.
Absolutely.
And when I heard those, there's people that have used, say, the TG ones or whatever, or the vintage ones, know that they have just a very individual sound. There's nothing else in the world that sounds like that limiter. Oh my God, that sounds like an old record that my folks used to play. I love it, And I started trying to reverse engineer them. I used to, I would buy copper-clad boards, and I would actually draw out the artwork off that circuit board by hand. And then you dunk it in acid and you hand etch it, they call it, and then you drill the holes by hand. That's how when I was in my early 20s, I started trying to do that with those. So, because I loved them so much.
There's so many different directions we could go in here, all of which are super interesting. But I suppose the obvious one is how do you stumble upon each other? What was the process? You made something?
I made some.
Yeah.
I made a few. One of the first few ended up with Spike Stent at Olympic, is the way I know the story.
Yeah, I mean,
it's 20 years ago now.
Yeah, I mean, you asked, right? That's what happened, right? You approached Abbey Road and said, "What do you think?"
I think after But I think this was after Spike.
Is this one of those
This is, I think it's been a few
seek
years.
forgiveness rather than ask permission
I think there
situations?
was a little bit of seek forgiveness, sure.
Yeah.
Because I actually had EMI on the faceplate initially. So of course I think they were like, hey dude, settle down here. You know, I don't remember all of it exactly, but the way I remember it was Spike Stent had one. So those guys heard it and saw it probably pretty immediately, and then we ended up talking. That's the way I remember it.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone remembers. You
No,
know?
I mean, this was, I was working at the studios at the time, but I was an assistant engineer, so this was before I actually had any deep
Yeah.
involvement in all of this. But, I mean, the relationship kicked off pretty quickly, I seem to remember. It was the MD at the time you got talking
did.
to at Abbey Road.
Yeah.
And we were like, or you guys, I think, were like, well, this seems like a good thing to at least try.
From what I remember, and edit this out if it sounds terrible, but like Dave was the managing director's name. At first they were like, well, dude, come on, you can't just throw our logos on this stuff. But then he was like, but the guys listened to him and they thought you did a really good job. So we wanted to do the gear. We've talked about it. Like I think Pete Cobman had probably brought it up, and it had been in discussions. And then they were like, well, this is good. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. And
yeah, I remember you coming over to Abbey Road with some of the gear and did like
first
a bit of a
couple
talk
times.
through and show and tell with the engineers. And, you know, it kind of just, we liked the gear, you know, and it sounded good and it felt good.
I can only imagine what some of them thought of me, though, at the time, because I was like 29 and just this kid who's like, I love TG stuff. I'm going to sell it and make people love it, you know? And I can only imagine. But it's really cool. Mirek and I, you said you were assisting and I was just starting out at the same time. We knew each other right away, and this whole relationship has been between kind of you and I for this 20 years.
Yeah,
we've grown up through it together, which is neat.
I was asked to go out to a trade show, like the NAMM, one of the early NAMM shows, just to sort of help out, and we
hit it off.
We hit it off from there, and just ideas started sort of sparking
Yep.
from there. And what we did this, what we did that, and we've kept that going.
Yep. And then they ended up making an audio product section, and Mirek is in charge of that. So like, it's him and I think, kind of trying to make all this fun stuff, and he's great to work with. So
well, that's a good thing. It's good that you get on.
Yeah.
I was always wondering how that evolved.
Yeah.
But you're right, it did seem pretty quick. I remember hearing about your stuff, and then the next minute seeing Abbey Road endorsement on it.
Yeah.
So it was pretty quick.
lucky.
So what was the first official endorsed product that you did together? Do you remember?
The TG1.
TG1 and TG2, I think, were in very close succession. And at that time, we were really small, because I had been making a few other things before that. But once we came with those, people were like, oh, this is something new, and these things sound cool. You know, luckily.
Yeah, I mean, back then, I think a lot more people are familiar with the TG sound now, but back then, I think people were still discovering it, right? And the first time you hear that aggressive TG compression, and it's sort of, you know, like drum room mic sort of jump out the speakers, you're like, oh my God, that's the sound sort of thing. And it was exciting to sort of demo that to people and show people that, you know?
It really was, especially because you have the history, but it also delivers. Yeah. You know? So it's a really good mixture.
And I think from a music fan's perspective, it's that, you know, pretty much everybody who wants to be in a band wants to be in a band between 1968 and 1973.
Yeah, right.
You know, that's the period. It covers, you know, everything from Dark Side of the Moon, the first Full Zeppelin albums, you know, the Stones at their peak, Abbey Road, you know, and so many of those records were made on that console. Obviously, both Abbey Road and Dark Side of the Moon were two that would jump out to anybody watching this. It's kind of a perfect storm. But, you know, before that period with you guys getting together and doing this, everybody would just kind of assume it was all through those kind of old Telefunken, V-Series kind of pre-sounds. Yeah. You know, there wasn't really... It also helped enhance the history and understanding of how those records were made.
Yeah.
So it sort of became...
Most people initially, I think, thought it was all V72s. But that's just the very start. It very quickly progressed into the red desks and then the TG desks. And even without the desks, there was all the specialty outboard gear that they made, like the RS114s, that big green compressor. Actually, it's right there. The big passive curve bender, which you guys had a plug in with, and those, the fun little boxes and all that stuff. So there's just a really deep history of the just.
Well, Abbey Road itself is.
Yeah.
is
I mean, in
innovation.
just the gear itself, there's a huge background.
It's been amazing to sort of, through these great products we make together, to sort of go back and discover that history and go to the archives, pull out the old technical notes, blow the dust off, and look at this stuff for the first time, and work with people like Lester, and kind of just take people on that journey with us in a way, like keep the legend going, if it were. You've got people like Mike Batchelor, Len Page, Bill Livy. These are like technical legends. Well, to us, they're legends, and we want to let the world know about these guys, right? Who are making this amazing gear over in Hayes or Abbey Road, or a mixture of the two. And this gear was used on amazing recordings, and it's got a unique sound, a unique sonic fingerprint, and I just don't think there's much information out there on those guys, right? If you Google them, for example, and we want to change that because they made amazing gear.
Mike Batchelor in particular, there was many talented people there, but he was ahead of his time in so many ways. Like if you look at this compressor behind me, this was it in the 50s?
Yeah.
The initial design. It actually had look forward compression in the 50s, right? People think, oh, modern, that's a digital thing, that's a this and that. No, he was using analog circuits to delay the signal so that the sidechain saw the signal before the audio did. That kind of thing, like the TG desk.
Which is an absolute necessity for radio.
Yeah, right.
Makes perfect sense. And mastering. The
TG desk, compressor on every channel in 1969. It's not an SSL thing.
Yeah.
And there's many layers of that kind of stuff that I discover all the time.
Well, even the red desks, I think, were the first desks to have like faders like we know on a desk now. Before that, it was all rotary knobs. So and the compression on every channel, that was a first, I believe.
Yeah.
But even things like the RS56 EQ, I think that was the first parametric EQ.
Yes,
in the mid 50s or even early 50s.
And
they were like pushing the boundaries of what was done at the time.
For people that have had that plug-in or have seen that plug-in too, from the 50s, the amount of selection of the curves and frequency combinations, it's far, far ahead of its time. Like amazing.
Well, they called it the curve bender because it mangled
because
sound.
It mangled the curves. Yeah. Yep. Whenever I'm working on things or trying to come up with ideas or thinking of new ideas, I always try and think, what would the old guys have done if they were in my position 40 years later? What would they think about? What would they, things they would pursue? And things like the red mic and all that, where it's similar technology, but furthering the applications of it, where we actually put the red pre in a microphone and got a patent for it. It's a patented, the combination of its microphone and preamp circuitry is patented. So I look back and think, would Mike be like, hey, good idea, kid? That's what gets me up in the morning. We all want to be successful or make money or this and that, but I want to do cool things, and so I think a lot about those, and it's really inspirational when I get to read notes that Mirek has about. I even have of the original desk notes of Mike Batchelor's sketches and equations for the amplifiers, for the EQ curve calculations and things. Amazing,
And there's always stuff we're finding as well. Like even recently, we found an old kind of Len Page microphone book from the late 50s of all of his notes of all the microphones that were at Abbey Road, all the different measurements of those microphones, notes for like the little EQ boxes they'd make for those miphones. I mean, this stuff is like gold dust. And it's just so much fun looking through those notes and
where
sort of
is
trying
all
to work.
this stuff kept? Is it just randomly in a drawer?
No, it's under lock and key. There's stuff in archives and there's stuff under lock and key in certain technical filing cabinets at Abbey Road, like a mixture of the two. It's not just lying around as such.
Is there a filing cabinet to tell you what's in the filing cabinet?
I wish, actually. Yeah. Now, sometimes you've got to dig deep and hard.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like when we first started working together, they let me go to the archive in Hayes and they had a big room of all the Abbey Road stuff. I think it was before you had started trying to catalog it more, and which I know you've done a lot more since then.
Yeah.
And I got to poke through it and look for anything I thought might be useful, and we took it back to Abbey Road. This was with Dave and Tom, and poke through it, make copies of stuff I thought was useful or that I could learn from or maybe apply. And so I have a huge box here of photocopies of all the original stuff. But I made a joke in an interview years ago about it was like, in Indiana Jones when they open the Ark of the Covenant, and it's just like, all the gold.
Funny enough, Archives is like that last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Where the
right,
guy's just
hallway.
wheeling it for the hallway,
Yeah.
and the camera zooms out.
Their archive actually has
cavern.
that a hallway like that, as you go down, and there's all the rooms off to the side with all the stuff. But really cool, to be able to. Anyway.
So, I suppose a question probably people are asking themselves is component-wise. Mm-hmm. Is everything available, or are you having to reverse engineer stuff and redesign it, like transformers, etc.?
It's probably all of the above. Like transistors, especially, we have specific ones made for us. The output devices in the TG are not real common, but we've been having them made for almost 20 years now. We buy them in huge batches, and like the germanium transistors used in the curve bender, also same thing. So
was anybody actually still making germanium transistors when you started?
There are specialty companies out there that do things, and germanium transistors are becoming more popular again. So companies are starting to make them again, mostly for pedal placements.
I was about to say guitar pedals.
Yeah.
So, the fuzz pedals.
But I think we were on that. 20 years ago, we were getting into that, and but like the knobs, we remolded the knobs. You scan them, you have molds made, and we do those. We hand drill them, here, all that's kind of like they would have done back then. And
That's it. It's all handmade here.
yeah,
right?
it's all just.
There's always a sort of latitude in a British way of doing things that is very hard to describe. And I feel like here, this actually feels like if you all changed your accents, it probably wouldn't be a million miles away. Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit of a homesprung kind of more boutique-y way that we do things.
What's going on down on the shop floor isn't going to be a million miles away as to what was going on in Hayes, like, back in the day, right?
I've actually asked Mirek before, dude, are we too like? Is it too like low key, low brow?
No, that's what it's all about.
It's really just a big old workshop.
Yeah,
that's what I thought when I first walked in. I was like, I bet you this looks exactly like it would have done in Britain.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's
good.
I felt the same way. I just don't. You read about all these kinds of stuff, whether it be people that built a Spitfire or people that built a TG1.
Yeah.
It's always just a little bit kind of left of center. It's never really,
One of the, I don't know if it was Lester Smith or one of the older engineers I spoke to, but said something about a lot of the old transformers were actually made in a guy's garage.
Right. Okay.
So, like the early red stuff.
Yeah.
Before
it
was,
wouldn't surprise me.
Before it was quite as organized, maybe, or we're making quite as much stuff. But it's just dude making stuff. And
I think we want that. I think as people, I hate the word, but I want to use it, consumers, the people that actually buy the stuff, we want to know that it's being made by human beings.
Absolutely.
And that there's a sort of love and,
I
hate the word, I'm going to use it again, it's kind of the boutique thing. We want that.
Yeah.
We don't want to just feel like it's a faceless machine that's going,
It's been a big point, I think, probably from both of our perspectives from the beginning, to make it like it was being made back then, which was people putting parts together.
Yep.
Hand stuffing the circuit boards, actual wires, no ribbon cables. There's no surface mount where machines are doing, and they can make 10,000 in an hour. Everything here is made by a person from top to bottom.
Yep.
It's what I like to buy if I'm going to buy something. I think it's fair for the customer because they're getting a product that's going to last their lifetime. And if it breaks, guess what? We can fix it really easy because it doesn't have any screwy parts that are custom or weird or going to be out of date in 5 years, that kind of stuff. Right. So You know, literally your curve bender will still be working 60 years from now. If maybe we have to change a
Because
transistor
the
or
original
something.
one's still working.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
At
Yeah, they
least
seem to
60
work
years
okay,
old, probably
yeah.
70
Yeah.
years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Tell us about the TG and the red microphones.
okay. So a big part of what I've wanted to do with our relationship is expanding the the original circuits, more uses, more interesting uses, where I thought maybe some of the old engineers would have taken things were they still working on things. So I am a huge microphone fan. I think it's the most important part of the studio. I wanted to do mics that used that classic circuitry. So I was dreaming and like, well, could I use the red preamp somehow? I was experimenting with a preamp and a microphone combination with just like solid state circuits. And I was like, oh, I'm so dumb. Red microphone with preamp, you know? So that's where we started. So we literally took the red preamp and it combines that amplifier in a microphone application where you can literally plug it right in. You don't need a preamp or anything for it. It's got a ultra custom platinum membraned capsule, which is
Platinum membrane.
yeah, which is
There you
actually,
go.
it does have a different sound. It's a very smooth sound. It's slightly different than gold. But both of these mics was expanding where the original circuit started at. You know, being creative, having fun, doing something meaningful, you know.
I mean, that's what I love about kind of, you know, the way we work together is that you kind of take the classic design and then twist it slightly in a way that, you know, things weren't...
Hopefully the right way.
Well, I think the right way, but, you know, in ways they weren't originally designed to be used in the first place. And that's what it's all about, right? Rule breaking, and that's what they used to do back in the day. So, for example, with the TG microphone, you've got a microphone, but we've taken the tape selector EQ curves from the EMI transfer desk, which are really cool EQ curves, really creative, really musical. Weren't designed to be used in this way, obviously, but put them on the back of the microphone to be able to change the tone of the microphone. So it's sort of slightly funky, quirky things
that's a
like
great
that.
way to put it. You and I have both commented, it's a passive circuit that they did for these tape curves, for transfer curves, and it's very deep and it's very open. And you and I have both loved it for a long time.
Yeah.
And we're like, wow, that could be a cool thing to give you options in the sound of a microphone.
Sure.
So
one thing that was interesting about the NAMM show this year is I spoke to a lot of people that are bringing out brand new products, and I felt like the grey area is the thing we need to avoid now. You've either got something which is very coloured with incredible options of what you can do with it, or something that is insanely transparent.
Yeah.
And everything else in the middle just needs to disappear.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's just
right,
like,
okay.
you've either got to do something inexpensive and transparent that a kid or somebody can use plugins to colour,
Yep.
or you've got to have something that just prints it the way it's supposed to be.
We're that one.
Yeah, you're that one. You're the...
So with the TG mic on the back, there's a 5-position selector. And this is taken from the EMI mastering desks, which are still in use at Abbey Road today, like every day in many rooms. Yeah. And what this was designed for, it's kind of funny when you think about it. On there it says IEC NAB and NAB IEC. What that was for was when they got American tapes in, they could just put them right up and not have to recalibrate everything. They could flip this switch and the tapes would play back at the proper curve. But what I always noticed about it, and what Mirek noticed, it sounds super cool. If you like a Pultec or those kind of things, it's that kind of, but to me, it's even more deep and more open than a Pultec is, you know? So we were like, wow, what a cool way that would be to apply to something. And even more cool maybe on a microphone. So you can literally go from just flat to this, what I call setting 5. It's all the way to the right. It's a huge passive bass boost and a nice sweet treble boost. So you can literally, I use it on kick drum all the time, but even on drum overheads, if you want a really fat sound with like 1 or 2 mics, amazing, because it moves earth if you want it to. So it's really about that special sound of this equalizer. The rest of the circuitry in the mic is actually germanium transistors and it's literally the amplifiers out of the Mark I solid-state Beetle desk. So also germanium, cool sounding germanium transistors in there. You have other things. There's a low cut. There's a system A and B, which kind of retools the mic so that it, in system B, it's meant to take extremely high level SPLs. You literally can't distort it in that mode.
Oh, there's a challenge.
Yeah, right, right. But like on really loud drummers or right up on a 50-watt Marshall or something, it's all good with that.
Incredible.
And then just pad and pattern selecting, but it's one of my favorites. It always seems to kind of work, and it's a good price point, I have to say.
How much is it?
Street, I think, is $18.50.
That's great. Yeah.
And we'll play you a test, but it easily competes with vintage, expensive microphones and this just sweetens the deal when you do that.
Yeah, we were talking about the customer base for this. I understand who this is perfect for. This is like, we all want vintage equipment, but I don't know, if you're living in Iowa, for instance, and they don't know you,
yeah.
and you buy yourself a 47, that's absolutely fantastic until it breaks down, then you have to ship it to a major city to get it repaired.
Yeah.
What we want is we want that sound, but we don't want the buzzes and clicks and pops and all that stuff that's inherent in vintage equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I've throughout my career, I've completely taken that stuff for granted, like working at Abbey Road and
because
it's the most amazing technical team in the world, right? And if something goes down, it's fixed like 10 minutes later.
Or they have 12 more to replace it.
Well, yeah, we're lucky in that respect as well.
Have this one instead.
But even if you find some of this gear we've been talking about online or whatever, eBay or what have you, or Reverb, I mean, it's one thing being able to afford it, but when it turns up, is it going to sound any good, or is it going to? If it does sound good, will that last?
What shapes the capsule in and all sorts. Yeah.
So it's like a responsibility owning vintage gear, I think, which is great if you want to do that. Absolutely brilliant, But yeah, it's
I've never heard two 47s back to back that sound the same.
No, that's not.
We had a pair of consecutive serial number U48s, which I think you both know. They only made 750 of. We had consecutive serial numbers, and they were literally like chalk and cheese. Totally different sounding mics. And they were purchased by the same person.
Right.
So it was in the studio in Indiana, consecutive serial number 48s.
Yeah.
Totally different. And all that had happened is they just got different use by different people, dirty, clean, whatever the heck was going on.
Yeah.
I did, at the record plant, we had 747s. 747s?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I started to sing Saxon. Anyway, in a line, Isa went down and sung on every single one.
Yeah.
And we were just like, I couldn't believe it was the same microphone. I mean, so there is something to be said for vintage equipment.
Yeah.
But not all vintage microphones in particular are created equal.
Mics are tough, especially capsules, handmade capsules. You start there, there's already going to be differences, and then you start looking 50 years later with the membranes aging, drying out, moisture on them.
Okay, so what kind of capsules are in these?
They're ones we have made for ourselves.
Are they a Mylar capsule?
They're they're gold. This one is gold.
Yeah.
Mylar. This one is a platinum membrane.
Right.
We don't they're kind of a little bit secretive. We don't give out a lot of details.
Well, next dumb question then is, how long do you think that capsule's going to last?
Probably, I mean, as long as any capsule. We haven't had problems with them. We've sold, say, 1,000 red mics, and I've only had to replace one because of a moisture issue, for example.
They were using it in a swimming pool.
And they weren't, they weren't using pop filters. They had vocals up here, and it was just, even, with the shield on there, you take it off, and it's just spotted and covered with stuff. It looked like a 50-year-old capsule that I've had to reskin before. You know what I mean? So they're very hardy.
Yeah, I mean, if you look after microphones, they should last a very, very long time. We've got microphones going back to the late 40s at Abbey Road. And
it's incredible. But we've watched Lester clean them.
Yeah.
Just sits there with a brush.
Yeah. They need a bit of love every so often. But
Yeah, amazing.
Lester did a video with that?
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you did an A/B test for us.
Yes.
And what are it? It's the C12, a U67, and the
TG mic.
TG mic.
These are my personal mics that I use all the time. They're not funky ones we picked to make the test look good. These are mine that I use and that I've tweaked personally. And anyway.
Marvelous. And they all went through TG channels?
Yeah, TG2 preamps. Yep.
Okay, so all the same preamps over drum kit.
Yep.
Let's have a listen and tell us what we're going to listen to.
This is one we made earlier.
One we made earlier.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the
That's the Blue Peter reference for those.
yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't have thrown that in there. It's going to confuse everything. So this is the flat setting on the TG microphone. So I'm just going to loop that. I'll just flick between the three, shall I? And see what we can hear. Okay.
67.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's interesting because we actually off camera did a blind test, by the way, a second ago. I listened to all three. The 67 is really easy to hear. Now you're going to be able to download the multi-tracks down below so you can hear all this for yourself. But the 67, you feel the mid range, but there's also a little extra body in there, which I like. And then of course the C12 is a little scoopy, so it's got some low lows and definitely a pronounced high mid.
Yep.
The TG seems to be taking the bits of both that I like and putting them into one.
Trying to get it in the middle. And I think that's what we do with all of our mics. Because I feel like the old mic designs, 47, 67, C12s, they were purposely built because you had tape going on. Mm-hmm. You had tube consoles or you had very large discrete consoles. They had to cut through certain frequency spaces to make an impact on the recording. Nowadays with digital, I feel like that can be a detriment. Right. Personally. So I do try and go a little bit more of a hybrid thing where it's a little bit in between what some of those old ones are doing.
So that's flat. So what other settings do you have?
Yeah, so that's the flat. Yep. We have what I call setting 4, which is one to the right, and it's a slight low boost and a slight treble boost.
Oh, okay.
It sounds like this.
Actually, one of the biggest thing I'm hearing there is the C12's polar pattern it's picking up a lot more ambience.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. A lot more. That seemed to be more exaggerated than I felt like on the same one. Maybe my ears becoming more accustomed. Yeah, I like that a lot. So what's that setting?
It's one to the right.
Right.
I call it setting 4 because it's a 5
Is that a
position
very
switch.
popular setting?
That's what I use the most of
for
general use. For, say, kick drum, I use setting 5, which is the really blown out setting.
Let's hear setting 5.
You can put one mic on a kick drum. We sort of angle it slightly in, and it just.
And what's that
boom.
lifting like?
It's a big low boost, like in the say 50 to 60 range,
nice.
And then a nice sort of presence added in.
Oh yeah. Now, obviously, you can download these for yourself and listen for yourself, but that difference is enormous. Now the differences between the three, there couldn't be more chalk and cheese between all three.
So really, the whole approach behind that was we wanted an affordable mic that could still compete with that $18,000 C12, and
I don't know where you're finding C12s for only $18,000.
for that cheap.
Yeah. Last time I looked on Vintage King, it was $30K for a C12.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were 25 only 2 years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So please turn us on to where we can get these.
I'll put it in the comments or something.
Yeah. If you want to sell yours for $18,000, so there's plenty that will buy it. No, that's phenomenal. So even then, now I'm starting to talk about the ambience and think about the ambience. Even the 67 had a little bit more ambience than you do. So how are you getting such a tight polar pattern? Is that?
It's just, I don't want to give away all the secrets, but it's just how you polarize the capsule and things.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of the experimentation with our mic designs. And obviously, these guys always approve these things. We go back and forth. They'll hear it and send it back and say, yes, here's our comments. So it's just working it and working it. All of the capsule adjustments is what I spend years.
A slightly tighter polar pattern is going to make the mic a lot more usable in a lot more situations.
Yeah.
Especially live recording.
Yeah.
And I don't mean live as in a studio audience. I just mean
Yeah,
like
right.
having a band actually in a room playing at one time.
But actually working the pattern and just because there's many different ways to accomplish the same thing with a capsule, like the same voltage on the capsule, for example. But you can do that an infinite number of ways. And with both of these mics, literally spent several years just experimenting with that.
Very nice.
You know, so
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
So, once again, download the multi-tracks down below so you can hear for yourself and make your own decision.